Good morning, everybody. My name is Cole Stanton. I'm the Director of Education, Architecture, and Engineering Design Specification for ICP Group. And this is Coronavirus and Construction Considerations for Prevention and Management in the Pandemic. We're going to start this morning with a kickoff by Michael. Michael, if you want to take it away, I think I have you unmuted and ready to go. So please start anytime you'd like.
Good morning. Welcome to all our friends, and thank you for taking your valuable time to join us today. I also want to thank many of you who may have had trouble signing in onto our webinar on Friday for joining us as well. I apologize for that inconvenience. My name is Michael Weiner, and I am the president of Colony Hardware. There now seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel regarding reopening of job sites in all our regions. Over the last few weeks, I have reached out and spoken to a number of project executives, project managers, superintendents, safety managers, and labor foremen, trying to learn and understand how my company can be prepared to support your needs for maintaining a clean, healthy, and safe job site. What I heard back was more questions than answers. This morning, we hope to answer many of these questions and also introduce you to some practical, efficient, and cost-effective solutions for dealing with COVID-19 on your job sites. At Colony, we pride ourselves on partnering with the best suppliers and manufacturers. For over 35 years, FiberLock Technologies has manufactured superior quality, innovative products to address environmental, safety, and health hazards. Companies look to FiberLock such as IBM and Disney, institutions like Harvard, and government agencies, including the Pentagon, rely on FiberLock Technologies' expertise
Pleasure to do this again. This is education that is really needed out there, and we're getting a lot of really positive response. So it's a real pleasure to share this with the Colony audience and the Colony community. ICP is a building products company. ICP is a brand you might not know. It goes back to 2015, but we have 26 brands and over 14,000 products. And some of them go as far back as 1883. And a lot of them you would know. And in the environmental world, certainly our brands FiberLock and Disinfect are extremely well known. And our Shockwave brand that we're going to talk about this morning in terms of disinfectant has been the industry leader now for more than 2 decades. So when we talk about a chemical company or a disinfectant manufacturer, that's one thing. When we're talking about a building products manufacturer, a building systems manufacturer, someone who understands how builders build and how buildings are constructed, that's what you get with ICP. When I like to do education, I like to do education through the lens of chemistry. And with disinfection, the lens of chemistry really is all about how we clean, how we disinfect, and how we prioritize our efforts. It's how to set customer expectations. It's how to identify unrealistic expectations. And I just realized I was so eager to get into the material, I forgot a couple of housekeeping issues right off the top. I do want to mention that on this call are Mike Decker and Jeff Scott, who are the regional managers for the Mid-Atlantic, for the tri-state area, as well as Josh Troman, who is the vice president, who is in charge of the FiberLock brands internationally. And of course, we have a lot of the senior folks from Colony on the call. We will encourage you to please put your questions in the chat box. However, bear in mind, no one is monitoring and immediately responding to the chat box right now. We will respond after this time frame. We've also found in doing this educational workshop that there's a lot of opportunity for question and answer. So while we will try and wrap up right around 11, we will be ready to extend beyond that and take your questions via the chat box, whether they're in there or whether or not you'd like to add them at that time. Finally, I've had several requests to record this presentation. This presentation is being recorded by several folks, so we've got some redundancy. And your opportunity to get that recording after this presentation and share it with others will be found in our Masterworks community, which I will explain later. So let's go back to the educational materials. When I'm talking to a New York audience, whether it's a lecture to the folks at Cooper Union like I did 2 weeks ago, or whether it's to a construction audience like this, I don't need to spend a lot of time on what the pandemic is or how severe it is. Suffice to say, we are now well over 3 billion total confirmed cases, and we have now, unfortunately, exceeded the number you see on screen of 250,000 total deaths. I also like to put this on screen because I think it is one of the best, totally unbiased and up-to-date dashboards you can get out there, and there's a lot of them out there. This is the one from Johns Hopkins University, so I encourage you to download it. And if you go to our Corona microsite, icp.com/corona, there will be a link where you can download this dashboard. One of the things I think everybody has noticed, and I want you to hopefully come away thinking about when you see media stories, is that it almost doesn't matter what the media story is. It could be about antigen testing, it could be about state and local funding, it could be about the 1918 Spanish flu, and yet what you see all the time are cutaway shots of disinfecting, fogging, blasting disinfectant in massive clouds, spraying everywhere, people in moon suits and respirators. This is not only good eye candy for the media, but it is eye candy because it strikes a primal need. When we're afraid of something, when we want to get rid of something gross, it's the same impulse that has us go to the kitchen sink and go under the sink and say, okay, what have we got that I can make this all go away? And that's why there's this innate desire to reach for a disinfectant. Now, hopefully after a presentation like this, you'll have a better appreciation of why, yes, that's a healthy instinct, but also how we can be more controlled, how we can be more intelligent about how we roll out a disinfection. And of course, it kind of goes without saying, but it needs to be said at this particular moment in time, as we try to reopen our economy and reopen our society, we are going to have standardized disinfection procedures, standard operating procedures and plans for how to disinfect, how to evaluate disinfection, how to empower employees to participate, how to protect employees, how to issue new right to know information. All of this is coming with disinfection as we reopen this country. So, you know, this is an opportunity, hopefully, to help give you some ideas as to how to construct one of those programs and where to go for more resources. So as we take these uncertain steps forward, especially when I talk to folks in the tri-state area, you know, your region of the country was in a large part totally shut down. We are talking about reopening idle construction sites. We're talking about reopening idle businesses of all kinds. Where I am outside of Boston, it will happen at a pace that is different than that in New York, and Connecticut's already open, and Philadelphia is right around the corner. In New York City, you know, we'll see. It's going to be staged, as the governor has said. So the federal focus shifted last Friday. We all saw that the federal distancing guidelines were allowed to very quietly sunset. But the state governors are going to pick up many of those mandates. The social distancing guidelines are going to continue. They're just now going to continue on a more federal basis, where there's going to be state by state and even locality by locality restrictions. You look at California, for example, where Governor Newsom has said that he's going to start relaxing certain orders. Meanwhile, we've got 3 counties in California that have already all but relaxed all of it in outright defiance of the state, and the state has indicated no interest in cracking down on that sort of thing. So in a business environment where we like certainty, these are uncertain steps forward. And yet the construction shutdowns in the Northeast from Maryland to New England are going to ease. So now is the time to update our plans and maybe make plans where we didn't have them before. When we read the map, certainly we're going to get a data set, fortunately or unfortunately, from other parts of the country. I mean, the deeper in the south you go, the more working is going on in terms of construction. Canada is likely to remain closed for the foreseeable future, whereas the West is going to open up. Washington opened last Friday. California might not be until mid-June. The Midwest is slowed but working, but of course they're running into tornado season and weather season. And even if they were wide open, they'd probably only be half of what they would normally be in terms of volume. So let's think about some of the new requirements, since we have an opportunity in terms of reopening construction and reopening society. One of the things that everyone is going to need in terms of commercial construction, residential construction, whether you're a sub, whether you're a GC, whether you're an OM, is a COVID safety plan. And in some cases, like here in Boston, the city is requiring that all contractors actually have a COVID safety plan that is then backed up by a sworn affidavit that they will follow through on that safety plan. So certainly an indication here that the city government is very serious, and this is an example we expect to spread. Other new requirements are going to involve communications. You're going to see new specifications from architects using sections of master format, of AIA CSI master format, that you've never seen before and that you need to become familiar with. And they're going to be very vague and haphazard and have a lot of different content for a while until things sort of settle out and we start to see some specs that become well respected. We're going to see new communication requirements for worker empowerment. How much in terms of disinfectants on the site can we give to workers to ask them to take care of this task or that task in the course of their everyday workday? And there are going to be challenges from sites lying idle for long periods of time. We're already seeing it in a lot of the northeastern cities where we've had a very wet spring. We're going to see a ton of mold. So, you know, look at your plans for mold, how you handle mold, who your subs are for mold. Make sure you've got lines of communication going to them, because they're going to get really busy and they're going to be hard to respond to. And you know, the more you know how to handle mold yourself, working with a partner like Colony, the better off you are going to be. We've been doing mold since the beginning, and it's still the largest part of our business. So we're happy to help with that, and maybe we'll do a separate workshop. Legionella, same idea. You know, we had a lot of water standing in a lot of pipes in a lot of buildings for a very extended period of time. It is certainly reasonable to expect localized Legionella outbreaks, or maybe even localized Legionella epidemics. And of course, I want to mention there are supply chain issues that are going to continue. On PPE, for example, as we start to reopen restaurants and retail stores and warehouse centers, all of those workers are going to want masks and gloves and personal protective equipment, the same exact equipment you are going to need. So you need to have a reliable partner, and you need to be able to project your needs in advance to get ahead of demand, because just-in-time inventory is not going to be the way it used to be on PPE, or for that matter, on disinfectants. So when we talk about a COVID safety plan, what it really is another word for it is a mitigation strategy. Mitigation is one of the words I'm really trying to encourage people to use, and that I've worked with some of the folks who do legal for RIA, for example. I said, let's use the word mitigation, because we're not abating COVID-19. We're not doing restoration because we're not working to get anything down to zero or to clean up 100%. Make sure you don't fall into that trap. I was taught very early on in the environmental and restoration business that the most dangerous numbers you can deal with are 0 and 100%, because you never get 100% of the contaminant you're trying to remove, and you never get levels down to 0. There's always a margin of error. And to imply pristine or purity or absolute terms on anything is just setting yourself up for failure. So the word mitigation is a great word, because it is an active, coordinated, systemic approach to reducing a hazard to a manageable level. And that is really what everyone should be expecting. Expect that you're going to have more requirements in your COVID safety plan for testing. And by testing, I mean, there will be some mandates, and we don't know what those are going to look like yet, but be prepared for those. Not surface testing, because we can't use validation methods that we use for bacteria for viruses. It doesn't work that way. We can test against bacteria to see if bacteria levels are less than they once were, but we can only use that as a biological indicator of less clean versus more clean after effort has been expended. tracking, where do employees go? Expect more strict site access, or you are going to want to implement more strict site access. No more loosey-goosey job book. It's got to be actually really explicit in terms of when you came on site, when you left, where you're going, where you were supposed to at least be going. Because as you're going to see from a case study, I'm going to show you from a real situation on the West Coast with a top 10 builder, how important that sort of thing is. And of course, isolation and social distancing requirements are going to be bread and butter as part of your COVID safety plan. And as mentioned, a sworn affidavit, it may become the norm for employers in construction to say that they're going to follow through on their COVID safety plan. In addition, there will be new job descriptions and requirements. I think from what I'm seeing working in the architectural and engineering world, we're already seeing requirements such as a contractor designated COVID-19 site supervisor and a contractor or other, maybe designated by an owner's agent, COVID-19 safety officer. And of course, those folks are going to be interfacing with existing environmental health and safety, EH&S, as well as with the client. And of course, we've got the subcontractors that those folks, your safety officer and your site supervisor, will be working with. Who are those people in your organization? Do you know yet? Have you decided what criteria people have to be in those roles? These are all questions that are very serious business considerations as we move forward with reopening. As I said, communications will change. There are two major parts of architect master format that deal with the tasks associated with COVID. At least where we think they're going to fall is in 028700, which is biohazard remediation, or 025129, surface cleaning decontamination. So you'll note both of those sections start with 02. That means they're existing conditions. So the same part of specifications, the same part of job books where you see asbestos and lead and mold is where you're going to find architectural requirements or requirements from the architect or engineer or designer for remediation or mitigation of COVID-19. So a COVID safety plan is going to include a lot of things that we just covered. One of the things it's going to include is how we handle our tools. So the bullet at the top actually comes straight out of Boston's checklist that's required for contractors to resume work, where they say cleaning of high-touch surfaces such as tools and vehicles to meet CDC, OSHA, and Massachusetts requirements. CDC and OSHA requirements and Massachusetts requirements are works in progress, as they're going to be nationwide. But your COVID safety plan should include, at a minimum, what disinfection agencies are going to be used, not just anything that can be picked up that day from a local Jansan house. What are the products to be used? What standard operating procedure? And do you have secondary use labels? These are labels that legitimate and sophisticated chemistry manufacturers make available to you for free, so that they can go on your pump-up sprayers, on your hand trigger spray bottles, on any supplemental containers to make them not only legally compliant with OSHA requirements for container labeling, but also so that you've got a reliable and official way to convey health and safety information via the label to the workers using that product. The labels will also have the sub-registered number to indicate what product it is on EPA's list N. And EPA's list N, as in N for Nancy, is the list online of where you can find disinfectants that have been pre-qualified by EPA for work in regards to COVID. And I'll explain more on that. You're going to want disinfectants with a large range of microorganism types and building types, so you don't have to worry about going from one type of building to another, whether or not the product is EPA registered for that use. And you want to choose chemistry that has a low to zero collateral damage and that isn't going to require any additional worker protection in terms of PPE beyond what you'd normally have for precautions involving COVID. So we want this sort of thing in our COVID safety plan, and the more explicit we can make it, the better. And you can get help from us, from Colony and from FiberLock to make that happen. And your superintendents, your subcontractors, your workers, all have to be empowered. They all have to be trained. They all have to have renewed right to know materials, because we're going to be using disinfectants at a rate where we've never had to use them before. And so we need to be prepared for that. And as I mentioned before, remember there's going to be a supply crunch this summer. Get out ahead of it. Most of these products we're talking about have long shelf lives, 2 years, 3 years, even 5 years. Just stay away from the oxidizers, the bleaches and the peroxides that tend to break down in the bottle and are, basically worthless in months. So look for products that are going to last. You can order them ahead of time. You will use them for other things, but give Colony and your distribution channel partners a chance to get you what you need when you need it, instead of waiting till the last moment. So let's see. So here's the case study I want to share with you. This is a real experience that I personally had with a top 10 builder on the West Coast. And it was right as March turned into April this year. A new construction project, California. And what happened was a supervisor for the tile subcontractor showed up for work on successive days, as you can see from the chart, from March 30th to April 1st. And was positive for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19 disease, but was pre-symptomatic. And this is a big problem. You know, we just saw results from Triumph Pork Packaging outside of St. Louis in Missouri. And they tested 1,500 employees, of which a full 17% of them tested positive, but were asymptomatic. Now that's crazy when you think that. And some of the numbers we're seeing out there are that as many as 25% of infected persons don't even know they have the virus, are asymptomatic. And we don't know, the science is very thin as to how much they're shedding the virus before they become symptomatic. So in this case, there was no way of knowing. But as you can see, one of the first steps, one of the first things that's done is a version of construction site contact tracing. Where did that person go? Okay, this is where they went. Let's draw it on a map. Then let's look to either side and say, okay, we know a sneeze can travel 9 feet. That's the well accepted norm. Okay, so 9 feet off of that path to either side in any particular direction, including up and down, what do we have? What do we have for surfaces? How long is it likely to live there? So this is the kind of practice that was enabled because they had controls on the job site, including sign in, sign out, that was relatively strict. And one of the first things they did was build a decon chamber down at the bottom where the entryway was, which was the entrance, the major entrance and egress to the construction site. So this is the kind of thing that may unfortunately become well known, or at least you have to be ready for it, whether you are a NFL team trying to create an experience for your guests, but you need to be able to backtrack and contact trace if need be, whether it's staff or whether it's outside workers. The same thing applies to a construction site. And this is very typical of a construction site. This is a picture from the project. This is a big challenge. There are complex cleaning challenges here. First of all, what's worth keeping and what's not? What's got value and what doesn't? Who owns what? What's the chain of custody? These are all issues that are better discussed in advance, or to at least have a plan you can pull off the shelf if need be. Who owns this material? Is it worth keeping this? Is it likely to still be contaminated? Can we put it into what I like to call starvation storage, where we can isolate it for a couple of weeks until we know the virus is unlikely gone? And yes, I did say a couple of weeks, and I'll explain. So cleaning of high-touch surfaces such as tools and vehicles to meet CDC, OSHA, and mass standards. Again, that's coming straight out of the Boston document. What that means is you're going to have a program of cleaning the hard, non-porous, and porous surfaces. So that includes car upholstery, that includes dashboards and things that are delicate, that you need chemistry that is not likely to be harmful, but you need chemistry that's strong enough that it's going to work in less than pristine conditions. And we're going to have to get the construction dust off of our materials. We've got to avoid the obvious mistakes, but they're obvious because they happen all the time. When we're dealing with really great power tools and equipment, and 70% of them are cordless right now, we have to avoid the battery terminals, and we've got to be really careful to not get disinfectant or moisture of any kind inside of the plastic housing. And of course, we need to use products that aren't going to damage that nylon 6, that plastic nylon reinforced housing we have on these tools, no matter what color they are. So oxidizers are highly corrosive. And sometimes they're corrosive because of how they oxidize, sometimes because they have a very high alkaline pH. We want to avoid both. So, avoid disinfectants with pHs of 13, for example. Avoid oxidizers like bleaches and hydrogen peroxides that are stabilized with acids. If they're not stabilized with acids and they're pH neutral, they're probably fine. But when you've got oxidizers, all that copper and aluminum and plastic inside of our tools, degrades very quickly. Oxidation happens almost immediately, but you don't see the effects of it until later. Remember when Sandy came in and struck New Jersey, and a lot of folks used bleach in their houses to remediate, and then 2 or 3 months later, what did we have? We had a rash of house fires all up and down New Jersey, and that was directly attributable to the bleach that was used. We've got the same problem. We don't want construction site fires because we used oxidizers, we used bleach, cleaning something as simple as tools or job boxes or whatever the case may be. So you need to get contact time. Remember that. You need to get wet enough to get a contact time so that everything is dead on the tool. 10-minute wet contact time. Wipes, and you can make your own or you can get commercially available. Our Benefect wipes will be back in stock hopefully rather soon. I know Colony's trying to get them for you as soon as they possibly can. And remember also, when you're doing remediation and you're spraying, that spray can get into unprotected areas where you don't want it, especially if you're using electrostatic, because electrostatic is driven by a polarity charge, which means it'll try to go everywhere. So that's just one of the things you got to think about. This is one isolated example as well. How are we going to handle tools? How are we going to handle our personal protective equipment? What am I going to tell my guys in terms of what they should do with their hard hat, with their gloves, with their half-face respirator? A lot of that reusable PPE can be cleaned. We're working on technical bulletins on that right now, and we'll be prepared to share them with you soon. So what about bleach? I was asked to just say a couple words about it because, of course, I've used an awful lot. In fact, I helped develop our engineered bleach, which is a phenomenal product that we can deal with in another workshop, the Instant Mold Stain Remover. Bleach is a stain remover. That's really what bleach is for. And that's what it does best. Whether it's in laundry as a laundry additive or whether we're using it on surfaces, it bleaches out stains. It changes their color. It oxidizes the pigmentation so that the eye can no longer see it. And it also tends to lose a lot of its chlorine the moment it comes in contact with organic materials like wood. You get a lot of flash off, you get a lot of wet, and unnecessary wet equals mold. Bleach doesn't usually have a whole lot of cleaning ability to it unless it's one of these new engineered bleaches like I mentioned, which means the more time guys are spending trying to clean with bleach, the more expensive and wasteful it is. You do see it. People ask me, well, why do I see CDC recommending bleach? Well, you got to remember, CDC works in Africa. They work in Svalbard. They work in the Middle East. They work in places where disinfectants aren't available, but bleach is available everywhere. So that's why you see it in some of the disaster restoration documents, because they're working in the armpits of the world. We don't have to do that. We can use more sophisticated materials. And the bleaches that are on EPA list N, by the way, aren't ordinary supermarket bleach anyway. They are much more expensive labels that are EPA registered. And remember on wipes, even if you're using wipes that begin with a brand name beginning in C or L, they're probably quaternary ammonium chloride, not bleach. So when we look at past pandemics, we get at least a little bit of reassurance that we've been through this before. I think that gets lost a lot of the time. People are wondering and they're worried about us, how much we're improvising and how little we know. Well, it's true. The science on COVID-19 is very slim. There's a lot we're still learning. But we have to remember, we've got a community of disaster restoration and catastrophe recovery professionals in this country who have been through epidemic before, and to a lesser extent, pandemic before. Personally, this is my list. I just happen to put it on the screen. Bird flu, swine flu, SARS that happened earlier in the 2000s from 2002 to 2004, the Ebola considerations we had when people started to come back from Africa, bringing it with them, and we had to treat them as patient zero and make sure we didn't get the community spread that we're currently experiencing with COVID-19. Norovirus outbreaks happen every year. Legionella outbreaks happen every year, and every year we get avian flu outbreaks that never make it into people. They're not zoonotic infections. They don't make the transition into people, but they do infect tens of millions of poultry that we have to cull, and then there's not chicken in the supermarket to the extent we expected. So these are all experiences that my team has had, that we understand. So we're not completely in the dark. We have had some past experience, which is very valuable. So when we talk about surface disinfection, I use the acronym SHEP a lot just because it helps remind me: surface hygiene, epidemic, and pandemic. It is not a reference to one of the Stooges. That's SHEMP. This is SHEP. So we have we have 6 products on EPA list, and I know some of you generationally didn't get that reference, but that's okay. Watch Family Guy more, you'll get it. You have 120 microorganism kill claims on some of our labels. This is important. Remember I said in the SOP recommendations for COVID safety plan, you know, choose products with really big labels, with labels that cover a lot of different use sites and a lot of different microorganisms. That benefits you in terms of always making sure it's EPA registered for wherever it's going when it goes out the door of the shop in the morning. And remember, there are 3 basic platforms for disinfection. There are concentrated products, ready-to-use products, and wipes. Right now, what is most available are ready-to-use products. Concentrated products probably aren't going to be readily available in a lot of parts of the marketplace, and I'm generalizing here, I understand that, until late summer, early fall. Over the course of the summer, we're going to see wipes come back online and be more and more available after the wipe manufacturers were utterly cleaned out in the early days of the pandemic panic. So we have decades of experience. We've done this before. And one of the things we can state for fact, not opinion, fact, is nobody is EPA registered for CoV-2. Nobody is registered for the virus that causes COVID-19 disease. Nobody is approved. Nobody is authorized. No one is designated or any word like that. And if you do see that online on the internet, and you will, those are charlatans. Those are chuck in a truck guys. Those are speculators looking to get your money. The reason we can't be EPA registered for COVID-19 yet is because we can't test against it yet. It's a brand new organism. You will see disinfectants with human coronavirus label claims. We have them on some of our products. That's referencing the coronavirus that, or the group of coronaviruses that, like influenza, recirculate seasonally every year. Coronaviruses cause up to 30% of the common colds in this country. Those are the successful coronaviruses. Those are the ones that aren't causing pandemic and killing their host. They're operating in the background and proliferating as, you know, as they see fit. This is a different strain. And as I'm going to explain, there's a lot we don't know about it. This strain, until we can get it into the laboratory, develop test methods, and actually test against it, and be data-driven the way our process has always been constructed, you will not be able to EPA register for this product. And anyone who's saying otherwise is embellishing at best. So, and the word EPA approved, by the way, because that's the #1 question we get is it EPA approved? Is your shockwave disinfectant coal EPA approved? And the answer is no. First of all, let's get rid of the word approved. EPA doesn't approve anything. They register labels on products based upon data provided by the manufacturers that the product does what it says it does and can do it safely when used according to the label. That's the way the system has been set up since 1947. So choose products that are EPA registered, but recognize that you're going to be choosing from list N, that EPA has pre-qualified products. And this is an example of what we have. For example, this is our table of products from list N, showing our EPA registration numbers, showing the organisms where you want to go to the label and say, okay, I got to follow the instructions for this organism, 10-minute wet contact time, great. Is it ready to use? Is it concentrated as a wipe? This is the type of communication you can expect from a legitimate disinfection manufacturer. Same thing in Canada. If you have operations north of the border, it looks like almost the same list because it's following the same type of model. So Shockwave ready to use, both on the Canadian and American lists, is a ready-to-use quaternary ammonium chloride product. It is a blend formula. It saves time and labor. It does not require mixing. No human error factor. Has a very large label. As I mentioned, this is an important benefit, 120 microorganism kill claims, and amongst them, EPA registration for over 30 different viruses, including several of the small non-enveloped viruses that are of greatest concern. And it has also something that's really valuable. Make sure you're not cornered by your disinfectant choice into hard non-porous areas only. Hard non-porous surface disinfectants are the vast majority of the marketplace, 90+%. And then there's a smaller percentage that have disinfectant claims for hard non-porous surfaces, as well as sanitizing claims for porous materials. And that is really what you need to be looking for, because you want to have that capability, especially on a construction site where so much of what you deal with is porous. You know, whether it's oriented strand board or wood studs, you're not dealing with hard non-porous surfaces all the time. If you're doing pandemic disaster response and you're doing people's offices or schools at night, you're going to have a lot of hard non-porous surfaces, but you'll also still have porous materials. So regardless, you need to have products that can do both. You need a product that can disinfect hard non-porous and sanitize, which is the operative word for porous materials. We sanitize porous, we disinfect hard non-porous, and that's key to make sure is up to date in your standard operating procedure. So if we can't get EPA approved for COVID-19, then how do we know EPA List N is worth anything? Well, understand what EPA and CDC do when there's a brand new microorganism is they do what's called a SWAG, a scientific wild ass guess. At least I and some of my friends like to call it that. It's a deductive reasoning based upon real microbiology. So it's not, as silly as it sounds, it's actually based on real solid science, which is coronavirus, for example, is part of the coronavirus family, all of which are basic enveloped viruses, all of which are among the easiest viruses to kill. So we don't exactly know, but how can we make an educated projection of efficiency, of efficacy? Well, we can look at small non-enveloped viruses, which are very difficult to kill, such as norovirus, which is always a problem on cruise ships every year, and it takes a ton of effort to eradicate it once an epidemic on a cruise ship has gotten underway, or on a college campus, or in an athletic locker room, for example. Those norovirus, adenovirus, poliovirus, rotavirus, rhinovirus, and others, those small non-enveloped viruses are much harder to kill than simple enveloped viruses. So if we already have a label that kills those, and we're willing to go through EPA's application process, then we can get pre-qualified, such as for List N, for coronavirus, because coronaviruses are easy to kill. So that's how List N is constructed. This is what it looks like. It's the key to the lock on the door on this one is the EPA registration number. I'll let you read this slide later if you revisit the presentation. This is a sort of clearer to read example. Our registration number for the shockwave that you're getting from Colony is a 3-part number, 61178-2-73884, the last bit of which is ICP fiber lock. That's our identifier. So the rest of the number is the master registrant. This is the intellectual property. These are the chemist guys who developed the technology but can't bring it to marketplace. So they've got a name for their product. They call it public places, which is very apropos considering what we're worried about a lot of times is public places. We provide that chemistry to the restoration and catastrophe recovery marketplace. So if you put in the entire 3-part number, it won't do anything on EPA List N because that's not how EPA thinks. You got to put in just the first 2 parts. And then you'll see that it's included on List N. And as EPA says, if you've got the same matching first 2 numbers, then you're getting the same chemistry. And that's how they built it. It'd be nice if they built it with all the 3-part numbers. They don't. That's not what they do. So remember to use this is how you use your numbers. This may be a slide that you come back to from time to time. And the label is the law. I can't stress this enough. If you have any doubt whatsoever, hey, can I use it this way? Can I not use it this way? Can I use it for food contact, for food processing? Very common question. Follow the label. Go ahead and get an email from Mike Decker and Jeff Scott, but ask them to show you where it says that on the label. And bear in mind, the label can't cover everything. There are always gray areas, there are judgment calls, there are deviations that need to be made, but the label is the law at the end of the day, and that's what everyone needs to remember. So let's go back to the case study in California. In one respect, construction projects and managing COVID-19 or your COVID-19 safety plan is a lot easier than it is in occupied finished structures. I mean, we've got painted surfaces like this where we can spray them, and if there's a little runoff, we don't really worry about it. At this point, the floors aren't even finished in a lot of these cases. And that's key to making our decisions as to what product we're going to use and how we're going to use it. Whereas when we're working in an occupied situation, as you'll see, some of the offices involved in this building, they get more complicated very, very quickly. This is typical. If I want to fog this corridor, well, what about my utilities that are all exposed up there? What kind of damage am I potentially going to do to those? Where do I have live current running? Who owns all this stuff that needs to get out of the way? And who's going to clean up all this construction? We're talking about the construction site on the West Coast. In this particular case, the tile supervisor was spending a lot of time where? Of course, the bathrooms. So here we had a mix of surfaces that needed to be taken into account. We had surfaces that were hard and non-porous and actually really smooth like tile that were going to be really difficult to get a 10-minute wet contact time on the vertical because it was all just going to run off and drip. And as we mentioned, 10-minute contact time, we've said it over and over again, that's the wet time that's required for general kill, for disinfection for most microorganisms. But we also had this really porous, very thirsty board that had not yet been finished. So unlike our painted walls and our tile floor that you can see here, we had to make sure that we could get enough product on there in a very hot environment so that it would actually disinfect. So we get our 10-minute wet contact time. Thank you everybody for bearing with, getting reacclimated here. So here, for example, are some of the tile walls that were finished. How do you get a disinfectant in a hot, dry building to adequately wet this surface for a full 10 minutes? Do I use a fogger? Do I use a mister? Do I use an airless sprayer? Well, those are the choices we're going to be made. In which case, here, actually a foamer was used because a shaving cream-like foam would give them the cling and the vertical hang in order to properly disinfect for the full 10 minutes. So I also want to stress, as we're learning all these skills, this is not the last time we're going to need this. And I'm not referring to a second wave of the virus. What I'm referring to is the difference between epidemic and pandemic. And I just want to double check. Everyone can hear me fine? Josh, you can still hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Great, thank you very much. So what is an epidemic? What is a pandemic? This is important to learn. An epidemic is an outbreak of disease that spreads quickly. It could be an existing disease, it often is, or it could be a new emergent disease like this one, and it affects a lot of individuals so fast. That's often a college campus, or it's a community, maybe it's an ethnic community that isn't vaccinated well against something, certainly something in New York you're already familiar with. Whereas a pandemic is when an epidemic goes global or goes continental or goes regional, and there's some discretion World Health Organization has in terms of when to declare a pandemic. But a pandemic has greater range and coverage and greater geographic challenges. It's basically a really huge epidemic. Epidemics we're still going to deal with all the time. We've seen mumps outbreaks, for example, on construction sites, as we've seen them in universities. We've got a lot of other organisms, rubella, shigella, all these can cause epidemics from time to time. So why are we talking about disinfection at all? This is a question that was coming up in January and even into February, because the primary method of transmission of this microorganism is by sneezing and coughing and speaking and otherwise releasing from infected individuals, and then having uninfected people breathe in those respiratory droplets. So infected persons, yeah, that's how it often takes place, but those people are also contaminating surfaces in the built environment all the time, whether indoors or out, whether finished construction or whether we're working, surfaces are getting contaminated by those 20+% of asymptomatic individuals who are infected, who are shedding the virus. So we need to be disinfecting on a regular basis. Now, back in January and February, we made some assumptions before we had a lot of data that the coronaviruses as a group probably don't last all that long on environmental surfaces. They're not all that robust. Well, it turns out COVID-19 has exceeded those expectations and is actually probably generating a lot more in the way of infectiousness than we had thought, for not just hours, for days and even for weeks. So one of the first indications of this came in March when the National Institutes of Health published a study showing that COVID may survive for days. This has since been confirmed by Health Canada. Journal of Hospital Infection came out with a late February study that actually got almost no attention, talking about how the COVID was viable for 9 days on plastic and steel, and yet nobody paid a lot of attention at the time. Now we're paying a lot of attention, because when we look at data like this chart here, we're looking at the original SARS, which was known to be difficult to kill. And then when we're looking at the current strain, which is in the middle column, and compare that to seasonal influenza that we deal with every year, we're looking at the current strain of coronavirus, the emergent strain of the COVID-19, lasting for 3 days. All of a sudden, we were revising all of our programs saying, well, what do we do now? If it's living beyond a few hours, if it's actually living for days, there's a lot of surfaces we can't leave out of commission for days. And this was the case with SARS and now with COVID-19, coronaviruses that last longer than originally expected. Certainly longer than we're used to on surfaces from influenza. And then, of course, came the Diamond Princess, which was the first cruise ship that really made it into the news big. This was the one that ended up docking in Japan and where we flew everybody back to military bases in California for quarantine. Well, after the passengers were removed, the Diamond Princess, we revisited those cabins. I should actually say, some researchers who provided the research for CDC revisited those cabins and found that 17 days later, they were getting not just traces of the virus, but they're actually getting samples of the virus that were still infectious. So those surfaces were still capable of generating viral COVID-19 infection more than 2 weeks after the sources had left. So now all of a sudden we're forced to revise our estimates yet again. And so when we go back to our case study on the West Coast, and that's what this picture is from, and we say, okay, what are we going to do with this kitchenette? We've had a potentially infected person in here. We need to start making decisions. Can we put some of this in storage, or can we just close the door and leave it for 3 days? And the answer is maybe. Or do we have to wait 2+ weeks? And the answer is maybe. What we certainly know is in a lot of buildings and structures and operations, we can't take this out of commission. People are entitled to breaks, for example. So facilities need to be made available. So everything that's hard and non-porous needs to be disinfected. Everything that's involved with food, we have to follow the label, which in the case of the Shockwave ready to use, we've got great food instructions on there. But if there's any direct food contact, it requires a rinse and a wipe. There are low value contents here that are just going to get thrown away. So these are decisions that we had to help the contractor, who again was one of the top 10 builders in the country in commercial construction, figure this out. This is probably the most challenging environment. What do we do here? Well, one of the things that's always an issue is paper. How do we handle paper? And the answer is it's pandemic, people. If it's not valuable, throw it away. You can see little Johnny's teapot on the wall. Unfortunately, that should probably go. Anything that's not legal or not irreplaceable needs to go. Anything that is legal or irreplaceable should get scanned and then get disposed of. Fortunately, usually in an office environment, the scanning resource is right there. We don't know if documents can be freeze-dried the way they're done for water damage. We just don't know. You will see people online who are using vaporized hydrogen peroxide foggers and other types of foggers in their fogging paper. And just bear in mind, if I need to get things wet for 10 minutes to disinfect them, 10 minutes wet, paper doesn't usually respond particularly well to. Usually it's nothing but a mess and a disaster. So, we can minimize the amount of paper that is out that can possibly get cross-contaminated. Another thing we can do is bear in mind that paper is unlikely to carry a lot of infectious disease. The Journal of Hospital Infection article that I had read showed that paper was one of the least likely to carry the virus for an extended period of time. On cardboard, we can expect 24 hours, maybe longer. Paper even less than that. It turns out that this COVID-19 organism seems to be much more robust and able to survive outside the body on hard, non-porous surfaces versus porous materials, which is fortunate for us because hard, non-porous materials are the ones that are easiest for us to clean and disinfect. So when you look at this picture online here of the office environment, which was an administrative office, this is you'll see trailers similar to this, right? All the paper had to go. The monitor up on the wall had to be protected and done by hand because any type of fogging activity would have probably caused water droplets behind the glass. The computers and electronics can often be handled with hand trigger spray bottles and rags or sponges. Bear in mind, a lot of these components are touchable and therefore don't have electric live current running through them. And CDC actually has a study involving quaternary ammonium chloride chemistry, not so dissimilar from ours, where they didn't see any damage to keyboards until they'd done 300 cycles of cleaning and disinfecting. So, you know, there are solutions here for these types of environments. How you deliver the equipment, the conventional way of delivering disinfectant involves pump-up sprayers or hand trigger spray bottles, again with the secondary use label provided by the manufacturer. So whether you have them in a handheld or a backpack, whether they're a compression sprayer or a pump-up or whatever terminology you want to use, this is core. This is like your infantry. This is your ground troops. Simplicity, they're familiar, they're low training costs, they're available, they're good for tight spaces. The disadvantage rate is, of course, that they're relatively slow, which for large space disinfection is a big deal. Large spaces are one of our biggest concerns, and this is a big deal with construction where we've got really big, wide open floors in a lot of cases. How do we get speed and scale of disinfection while also getting 10 minutes wet contact time to ensure efficacy? And the answer is there's basically 4 methods that we teach. And these are all slides that you'll be able to get access to, so I'm not going to repeat everything on the slides. I'll just glance through them. Foaming is a wonderful technique, especially for vertical surfaces. Remember on the job on the West Coast, that's what we used on the tile on the vertical to make sure we could get 10 minutes wet contact cling. It doesn't waste much product. It's easy to see where you're going. It doesn't require a lot of training, but like pump-up sprayers, it's slow. Airless sprayers are a brand new innovation. I'm going to show you some video of those, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But the ability to take your piston pump airless with a fine finish tip, which is really the secret. You want that HEA tip, at least for with this Titan equipment you see pictured here, the 410, the 440, the 3000 Elite. With airless sprayers, especially on wheels, you can get a lot of production rate. You can cover a lot of territory. You run multiple hoses, including off of some larger equipment. So this has proven to be an extremely attractive option and probably the leader in the clubhouse, I would say, when it comes to large public spaces. The other spray that gets a lot of attention is electrostatic, which is a great technique because when it's properly deployed, it can be used to wrap around surfaces and get disinfectant everywhere. That would be difficult to do with an airless sprayer or a hand trigger bottle. Some of the electrostatic manufacturers say that they're 78% more efficient than a hand trigger spray bottle. I don't know if that's true, but it's certainly a lot more efficient. The problem is it goes where you don't want it. It doesn't work well in corners because of the Faraday effect. It generates a dry fog, which is a very limited amount of wetness, which is really efficient, but it also means you might not be getting 10 minutes wet contact time. So when you read really deep into the electrostatic manufacturer's instructions, first of all, they're going to tell you you can only use their proprietary chemical in a lot of cases, or you avoid the warranty on your machine. But the other thing is that you need to bear in mind that you're going to get it going to places you don't want it to go. So the polarity is great because it goes to everywhere, but sometimes that means it might go somewhere you don't, like into a job box, into a tool, etc. So electrostatic is fine if you can untrain the user to avoid the dry fog technique and actually make sure you get enough wet contact time. And know, of course, that some surfaces can't be charged. You can't get an opposing electrical charge to make it work, like a carpet. And also, some of these systems don't use water-based disinfectants. They're forcing you into alcohol-based disinfectants, which are flammable and are difficult to manage on a job site. And the fourth of the 4 methods, foaming, airless, electrostatic, and this one, cold misters and foggers, you're going to see a lot of this in the photos in New York as they try and work 24/7 to clean and disinfect the MTA, the subways, the buses. They have set quite a challenge for the city in the subways and buses. And these handheld units, like the one on the right, are extremely effective. They're really great tools. They're inexpensive. They generate a mist or a fog, which held in the hand can be directed to surfaces that you're trying to coat. Note, I'm not saying fogging as a broad technique of spraying a wide area and hoping it goes where you want it to go. CDC and EPA don't approve that. They will approve using these fogger techniques to get a 10-minute wet contact time. Now, I will say with the unit on the left, the hurricane fogger, that's a terrific technique if you want to set it up in a space to generate a lot of mist, to pull what's in the air down to the ground, and to get things wet to kill some of the microbial activity that's present as a knockdown, as a preventative treatment before you send your cleaning workers into a highly contaminated environment. That's a great technique as well. As I said, fogging, and this is a picture that a friend sent from Kenya a couple of weeks ago. This is what CDC and EPA do not want to see. And in their question and answers, EPA is very clear that you cannot use fumigation or wide area spraying to control COVID-19. You need to use targeted application, getting you 10 minutes wet contact time on each and every surface. So there's no easy answer where you can just spray and walk away or fog it and forget it. That doesn't work. With the airless, you want a high efficiency tip. You don't need much in terms of pressure thanks to that tip. And you can get several hundred feet of hose. And that's what was done here in California. They did the contact tracing, as you saw before, on the building schematic. They secured the entry area. They created a decontamination area where they could take off and put on don and doff personal protective equipment. They negatively pressurized and put up critical barriers to prevent cross-contamination with other unaffected parts of the building so your other trades could keep working. And they figured out what the chain of custody was, where the valuable contents were, what could get thrown away, what could be sent out for starvation storage, in other words, isolated for several weeks to know that the virus had been deprived of a host. Then what was done first was a knockdown large droplet fog, because airless makes really big droplets. And they said, okay, if a sneeze travels 9 feet to either side of the path, then if we double that to a 20-foot running perimeter to the known path where the infected person was, then we've got a certain margin of error. We have a certain safety buffer. And that's what was done. A knockdown large droplet fog with shockwave with airless sprayers set to a high mist setting, put on wheels so they could start at the area furthest from the entrance and work their way back. And that's exactly what was done here. Now, this is what happens when you don't have the right tip. With an airless, it works. And you're probably going to get a fog on that mirror and anything high gloss, by the way. That's about the only time you ever see a residue. And that's wiped off with a terry cloth towel. But here you're getting your 10-minute wet contact time, and you're not getting any puddles on the floor, but you're getting a cloud, a hard-to-control cloud of disinfectant, some of which is no doubt going into the air handling system. So this is enthusiastic, but not really what they needed to do. So the fine finish tip was really important to control and keep that mist down so it wasn't going up into the utilities like I told you earlier. So mobile airless systems, they use large Titans, they could use multiple operators, they could have 2 or 3 hoses going at a time. In this particular case, they did the ceilings and the walls and the floors. The ceilings aren't necessarily needed, and they certainly didn't do the open ones where the utilities were, just the solids. And they worked from high to low, started high points, worked to low points, and worked from the farthest point back toward your exit. You do this as standard operating procedure to minimize cross-contamination and to eliminate running and dripping and duplication of effort. This is what the airless spray pattern should look like. This is less than 1,000 PSI. This is actually Titan spraying when they were evaluating the technique at their R&D facility in Minnesota. And you can also use the same technique moving straight from the wall to the floor, which is valuable. You want to have one technique, one applicator, one setting, one device, and one product for efficiency's sake. So what was done here in the office? It was put under negative pressure. Even though it was judged to have had no exposure to the infected person, it was considered to be low risk, but it was decided to go ahead and decontaminate it anyway. We had to evaluate the 10-minute contact time versus special considerations like food in the kitchenette, value of certain paper objects, personal effects that could be put in starvation storage as non-essential items, and then a wet mist fog with the handheld fogger and hand trigger spray bottles were decided upon instead of the electrostatic, because the electrostatic was deemed to be too much of a dry fog and would be difficult to make sure that everything got wet for a full 10 minutes. So what's the second most asked question we get? The first most asked question, as I mentioned before, is it EPA approved? And as I explained, it's not. But the second most asked question is, how long does it last? And that's the question asked about our disinfectant, our shockwave, and any other. You cannot promise lifespan on any of these products beyond the moment you turn your back on a surface you just finished disinfecting. I know everybody wants a better answer, but that's what we got to deal with viruses. There are bacteriostatic hospital paints, and there are mold-resistant coatings. Heck, we make more mold-resistant coating than anybody. That's our area of expertise under the Fiberlock and Benefect brands. But when it comes to viruses, there's no static treatment. We have to have a regular cleaning and disinfecting program, large spaces, small spaces. We have to empower employees to participate, and we're going to need increased frequency of disinfection when there are sick individuals, and we need to spend special attention teaching people how to do hotspots. Faucet handles, toilet levers, doorknobs, toys, all that sort of thing need to be treated with special attention and need to be treated frequently. These are fact sheets that will be available at the Masterworks website, which would be your summary sheets for the products we've discussed today. We have a microsite as well, which is a quick shortcut to a lot of our targeted information that's specific to coronavirus. And Masterworks is our new community. It just went live this week. And as you can see, there's a disinfection and sanitizing portal in the knowledge area where you can find information on what kind of residue, what kind of fragrance, should I inject it into my body or drink it from a glass? And of course, I'm kidding, but there's a lot of good advice on there for you that you should really check out. If you have any questions whatsoever, this is a great place, especially if you can't reach anybody in the middle of the night and you're doing work on this. Check out Masterworks as your resource that's available 24/7. This is also where in the learning section, you can get certified as an applicator for certain trades, and where you can get workshop information, including this recording. Hopefully, if it recorded properly with our internet interruption, you can reach that information there. We are a little bit over, and I'd like to turn it back over to Michael at this point. Michael, if you are not muted, give me a second and I will get you muted. Go ahead and talk, and there you are. And you are unmuted, Michael. You can go ahead and bring us home.
Cole, thank you very much. The COVID-19 pandemic is arguably the defining global health crisis of our time and the greatest challenge we have faced since World War II. 2 weeks ago, it hit us here at Colony close to home. Many of you who do business with us rely on our delivery service, and our drivers play a very important role in our company. In fact, I tell our drivers that they are our ambassadors as they interact with you, our customers, more than anyone else at my company. On April 15th, one of our highly valued ambassadors who worked for Colony in New York City lost his life to COVID-19. Fernando Garzon was 42 years old with 2 young children. He was a hardworking guy, carried himself with pride and professionalism. He was extremely well liked by his Colony coworkers, and I know many of his customers. I think we would all agree that we are entering new and uncharted waters when it comes to how to best deal with this horrible and powerful virus. I hope you found this morning's webinar helpful and informative. However, the information and support does not stop here. Myself, Cole, Mike Decker, along with the Colony and FiberLock teams will be at your beck and call 24/7, 365 to not only provide the equipment and supplies you need, but ongoing support and training. Please look to Colony for Shockwave brand disinfectant, a wide range of dispensing sprayers, and the necessary PPE accessories, including disposable suits, eye, hand, and respiratory protection. Part of our mission at Colony is to be a solution provider, but we also do love to take and ship orders as well. On behalf of myself, Cole, Mike, and the Colony team, thank you for your time, your support, your business, and your friendship during these challenging times. Cole, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. So that's the end of our workshop, and we invite you to stick around and put questions into the chat box. We can handle hopefully as many questions as you'd like. I'll leave the contact information up on screen here for right now. And let me take a look at the chat box. I'm getting it up. Bear with me. I'm going to leave the video Actually, I'm going to stop the video. No, I'm going to leave the recording running because I don't want to accidentally lose you guys. There's the chat. Okay. So moving to the top and working down. What does RTU mean? I'm sorry, I should have been more explicit. RTU means ready to use. It means you're not diluting the product. It isn't a concentrate. You're using it straight out of the bottle. So 1 5-gallon pail makes 5 gallons. It is generally what everyone wants during a catastrophe. People want to be able to just do what needs to get done without having to worry about where to find fresh water and mix. Let's see here. So if a job site is shut down, this is from Mr. Blankenship. If a job site is shut down because of a COVID-19 case and we don't plan to open up for 3 to 5 days, is there any point in disinfecting the job site? Won't all the virus die anyway? Okay, so that's a two-part answer to this question. The first one is, if you follow CDC's guidance for healthcare and home care, where they say, well, after we've removed a quarantined person, what do we do? They often say, isolate the space if you can for 3 to 5 days, and then they say, clean it very thoroughly. So you're still coming back and cleaning that area, and you're doing a very thorough job of cleaning. So I would say if you're going to be touching every surface in there cleaning anyway, then you might as well disinfect because you're standing right there. Cleaning and then disinfecting go hand in hand. It's not hard to do, especially with a backpack sprayer like you saw pictured in the presentation. The other thing I would mention is, of course, we've got the data from the Journal of Hospital Infection for 9 days and the cruise ship for 17 days. So the 3 to 5 day figure, we're not entirely sure about that. The science is thin, so we're gonna have to see what happens. The 10-minute wet contact time, can you please elaborate a little on porous and non-porous surfaces versus sterilize and disinfect? I would say it's a two-part question. 10-minute wet contact time means that if it's starting to dry out during the 10-minute period, you're going to get it wet. It does not mean 5 successive 2-minute sessions of wet. It means we need 10 minutes of constant wet. Bear in mind, you kill a vastly high percentage of the microorganisms right off the bat and very early on the bell curve. But to get the 5-log performance that is required by some very technical engineering specs, and that's required for the definition of disinfection for EPA, 5-log means 99.99999% kill. That is going to require the full 10 minutes. Now, the second part of your question was porous versus non-porous and sterilize versus disinfect. So a porous surface is anything more porous than an unglazed, unfinished ceramic tile. That's EPA's definition. Anything harder and smoother than that is non-porous. So as I mentioned, you're going to have a lot of porous materials that need to be dealt with, which is why you want a product that can both disinfect and sanitize. Sanitize is the term applied to porous materials. Disinfect is the term applied to non-porous materials. Sterilize, which is in the question, is one step above disinfect. That is a 100% kill, which might sound like something desirable until you realize the chemistry you have to use to sterilize is usually exceptionally hazardous and normally only found in things like hospital operating rooms, where they have to sterilize things like catheters and other tools that go inside your body during surgery. So sterilize is usually an undesirable goal in anywhere outside of very, very controlled conditions. There are a series of compliments here, which is great. Shoe bath sanitizing. Absolutely. Do I recommend shoe bath sanitizing? Yeah, there are some great boot scrubbers that can be combined with liquids like Shockwave. We collaborate with one of those manufacturers. They're so simple to set up, and they're on and off. They're just you insert the boot in, it scrubs the boot, and then there's a separate basin for the sanitizer, the Shockwave. It just reduces the amount of cross-contamination potential tremendous amount. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's kind of niche-y application, but when you're building a containment and you're separating a clean area from a dirty area, a shoe bath is a no-brainer. Talk about low dollars for prevention of cross-contamination. So I'm just looking ahead for more conversation. Will this recording be available online? Again, I will go back to the Masterworks slide and just put that back up for you. This is where it will be. It will be in the learning section here. So this is where you're going to be able to find the recording. This is a Zoom service, so it takes a little while for them to get us the recording. Hopefully it'll be up later today, and that's if it recorded properly, considering we had that brief internet glitch in the middle.
Cole, this is Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin.
I just want to add, assuming that the recording does go through properly, we'll also post this video on the Colony Hardware YouTube channel.
Oh, good. Great. Thank you, Kevin. Question, what is the proper PPE that should be worn while spraying the shockwave ready to use? First of all, whenever you're spraying anything into the air, you want respiratory protection if it's anything but water. So, you know, dust filtration at that level. Now, once we're talking about spraying a chemistry into the air, it's HEPA. And if we're talking about COVID, I absolutely want HEPA. Now, I'm not using any exotic or volatile chemistry. I don't need organic vapor. I don't need acid bleach. Straight up half-face respirator with the pancake filters, the purple HEPAs would be great. N95 would be fine. P100 would be better. Obviously, you know, reusable PPE makes a lot more sense in cleaning it than trying to continue to find and stockpile disposable PPE. That, as I mentioned, the disposable stuff is going to be wanted by every restaurant waiter and everybody as we try and reopen society. So you're better off with reusable PPE when you can, you know, set up a standard operating procedure to keep it sanitary. Question here, I'll actually bring in either Glenn or Kevin just to give you a heads up, which I noticed, because this question is outside of my depth, which is, how is the stock on everything New York City specifically? So I'll leave that to the Colony guys to pick up and run with.
Cole, this is Kevin. Inventory overall is good. It's as everyone can probably relate, a moving target and changing daily and hourly. So I would suggest just reaching out to your local Colony sales representative who can help you through confirming inventory availability.
And next question, thank you, Kevin. The next question is, what is available to clean masks? The wipes, as I said, are out of stock, but they're coming. The Benefect Decon 30, which I should mention is your botanical alternative, your botanical product in our product line. That has PPE instructions on the label, as does the Shockwave concentrate product. Let's see, other questions. Is staining or marking an issue with painted and non-painted surfaces? And should we spot test? If it's a really good paint, don't worry about it. We are doing some testing right now with Wolf Gordon on their Rampart product and on some other products. So we're working with some very high-end designer products. And we're testing our own Scuff Master and Zolatone, as well as a series of our California paints. If it's 100% acrylic and it's a good quality product, I'm not worried about it. If it's a very inexpensive, you know, bought from a thrift store, past shelf life gallon of mostly powder chalky flat white, then water would damage it. Bottom line is, we don't anticipate anything in terms of staining or marking with the Shockwave or the Benefect product. And we actually have some compatibility. We have a compatibility technical memo coming out hopefully next week. And we'll be putting our surface compatibility testing reports that the master registrant did up in the Masterworks site for access. That also brings up a lot of questions we always get in terms of residue. Generally, the residues, if found at all, are going to be a little bit of salt, a little bit of soap, and we have an answer for that on the Masterworks site. There's already a knowledge item there. Looking forward, let's see. What is most effective on outdoor machines such as skid steers? Outdoors, we're getting airborne deposition of airborne particulate all the time. All that airborne particulate can prevent the disinfectant from wet contacting surfaces in order to, you know, really disinfect the way we're supposed to. So I would say you're probably going to clean. Ideally, you're cleaning with a non-acid pH neutral hydrogen peroxide cleaner. Bear in mind, that's probably going to be a ready-to-use product, not a concentrate, so it's going to cost a little more, but it'll foam up anywhere you've got dirt and make it easy to see and easy to wipe off, and then you can disinfect all the hard non-porous surfaces with the Shockwave product, which has got great soil load tolerance. One of the things we pride ourselves with the Shockwave brand is soil load tolerance that other people don't do. I'm looking, I think that is all the question and answers in the chat box. Some great questions. I'll leave it open here for just a moment, but it is 11:15. So if there are any more questions, I'd encourage them, but I'm not going to unmute everybody because we still have hundreds of folks on the call. This has been a real pleasure. Again, my name is Cole Stanton. I'm the Director of Education in Architecture, Engineering, and Design Specification for ICP Group, which has the Environmental Restoration Group as the umbrella under which our Benefect Botanical and our FiberLock conventional disinfectant brands are available, as well as our over 100 solutions for lead, asbestos, mold, fire, smoke, and water damage, infection control, mobile containment, and many, many other things that we do. So no one else has put in a question at this point. So I'm just going to thank everybody.